Thank you guys so much for tuning in for another episode of Just Call Me Bridget podcast. I really do hope that you like this podcast, and if you do, please subscribe to the channel, and also if you would like a bit of more information, please join my Patreon because it really supports to help the podcast grow, and I really only want to bring the best guests out for you. I hope you enjoy another episode, and I hope that I do give you some new knowledge that you didn't know before and it was helpful. This is all why I do this. I started this podcast just to help all the visa holders out in Australia because I didn't have enough information when I started, and I really want to make this experience a lot better for you than it was for me, that you can just come to this podcast and you'll get everything you need to know to succeed in Australia. Thank you. Welcome guys to the 8th episode of Just Call Me Bridget podcast, and I'm actually so very excited today. Out of all the podcasts, I have managed to get here an incredible lady. She is Nikoletta Pal. Thank you for coming to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And just to give a bit of a expectations for you, she is a Ray White property management business development executive. So you mostly work in New South Wales and Australian Capital Territory. You have been in real estate for almost 15 years now, and that is
Correct.
amazing. And also, when I was researching you, we just talked about this before, you've also studied functional nutrition therapist. So thank you for coming here. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm really excited about this topic. Obviously, it's something that's very close to my heart as well, and it's close to what I do day to day. So I'm really excited about going into more details and hopefully helping your listeners with some advice or even some directions.
That's amazing. Thank you. Before we dive into the real estate, do you want to take our listeners through your Australian journey and how you've gotten to where you are today?
Of course, absolutely. I came to Australia like most people do, with the idea of coming to learn English. And I came in 2008 with a 9-month student visa. And again, like many people, I arrived and I just felt home. And I studied, I learned English, and probably 4 or 5 months into my visa, I decided 9 months won't be enough and I'd like to continue and stay a bit longer. So I extended my visa. I started to look at directions, how I could perhaps stay longer, what profession I could choose to then apply for temporary and permanent residency. And next minute I knew I'm a citizen. So that's obviously 16 years and a bit later, but that's how it started. It wasn't really intended as a long-term stay. It was really with the purpose of learning English. And yes, here we are.
That's so cool. So where are you from originally?
I was born and raised in Budapest in Hungary, and I lived there almost 24 years. And then I moved to Australia and lived in Sydney and also in Canberra, and then Southern Highlands, which is halfway between Sydney and Canberra.
So when did you start going into real estate? Did you have a calling for that before, or?
I wouldn't say I had a calling, no. I had a general interest. I've always enjoyed architecture, buildings, customer service, people in general. Interestingly, in Hungary, we do have a property, and I used to rent it out, helping mom with that, but I wouldn't say I had a calling. When I was studying in Sydney, I had a very comfortable and nice job in an upmarket retail store, selling garments made out of cashmere. And I liked working there, but obviously once you know that you are staying longer than a student visa, you start thinking about maybe I should build a career. And I was sort of looking at which way should I start, which way should I go, and somewhat being on student visa, somewhat we are limited, in my opinion, but I thought that I need to start at the bottom, and obviously with good work ethic and ambition and willingness to learn, I was hoping that I will make a career whatever direction I'm choosing. I studied law in Hungary, so I was looking at sort of law firms, and sort of like a reception entry level job, and I was looking at law firms, and then I was also looking at, for some reason, real estate agencies, and I got a job as a receptionist in a very boutique real estate agency in Sydney, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it, and because of that work ethic and ambition, I outgrew that really quickly. And in about 6 months' time, I moved on to another business with more opportunities. As a property manager, where I would say that I learned the most in my entire career. We never stop learning, but when it comes to property management, that's where I gained majority of the foundation I have. I had an exceptional boss, and he was an ex-builder, and he sold real estate and managed residential and commercial real estate. So it gave me a really good overview, and his experience was just something that always stays with me, even though that was probably 14 years ago. I will always remember that start. And I was there for some time until we decided to move to Canberra and took on another position, again, a higher position, sort of stepping ahead and ahead. And there I moved on to a head of department position in property management. And for various reasons, after I resigned, I decided that I may as well do it myself and open my own property management boutique agency in Canberra, which I ran for about 8.5 years, and again, a really good part of my life. And I was very blessed to have some amazing clients. And throughout this period, when I started in real estate, I was still on a student visa. So I'm not entirely sure about the conditions right now, but back then that meant that I can only work 20 hours a week legally. And that limitation obviously can make a little bit tricky where you get in. But I do think that the employers who realize the potential when they give someone a goal, that can be great for them as well, and that flexibility can pay off. So that sort of started as a student with 20 hours, and then I moved on once I obviously had a temporary residency. And throughout this period, basically, I, as I said, so from becoming a student, going on temporary, a permanent residency, and later becoming a citizen here.
That's so amazing. You make it sound so easy, like, oh, I just moved from one stage to another. That's so great. From your journey, what you just went through right now, what do you feel were like some of those groundbreaking moments for you that made you go forward, and maybe like one of the hardest learnings that you had to go through for yourself?
I guess it's really interesting. Human mind is really interesting, that we sort of seem to remember the positive experiences. We don't really remember the pain. I think we are designed that way. Probably people wouldn't give birth to a second child if they would remember the pain of the first forever. But I feel that I had plenty of rejections, but at the same time, maybe that's what I choose to remember. I had so many opportunities, and a lot of times, even though we find that coming from a different country, not having our core friends, not having our family around, not having perhaps our contacts that can be very useful to get ahead, obviously that can feel like a challenge. But it was also, in some ways, always an opportunity. I feel that obviously plenty of resilience was needed, and nothing was handed on a silver plate. But at the same time, and maybe as I said, it's just what I'm choosing to remember, but there have been a lot of great moments in terms of how that actually helped me make relationships better and connect with people. Always a conversation starter. I'm not sure about yourself, but people trying to pronounce your name, you can relate to that, obviously. People using different versions of your name, or even just listening to your accent, always a conversation starter, whether they've been to Hungary, whether they heard about Hungary, whether it's about our current prime minister, there's always a conversation around. So whether there was a difficulty and a challenge, sometimes yes. I think there were times when I felt that, it is much harder. I don't have my school friends here. I don't have my childhood support friends around me. I don't have people I built relationships with in other companies and industries. So that can definitely be disheartening at times. I guess how it depends really how focused you are and how badly you want to. I feel very lucky though that I never felt homesick in a way how I know some people do feel homesick. And again, I think that comes down to various things. Again, very lucky that I do have family visiting. Now I have my younger sister also living here. And obviously created my own family and friends now. But throughout especially those first years, maybe from 2008 until 2012 or so, you're really taking a lot of time and effort to establish yourself. And that can probably be the hardest part. But I guess it always depends in life in general how much you want something and how prepared you are to make sometimes sacrifices. I remember I came with the core reason to learn English. So the first probably 6 months I actually avoided Hungarians because I didn't want to speak Hungarian. I came here with basically no English. So the first 3 months all I did was, whenever I was awake, is to learn in some ways. So that definitely helped, and that's something that obviously can be a sacrifice, but that helped me to get my first job and then to build on that.
That's so cool. I think it's so inspiring to hear that you said that you built your own, real estate boutique agency while being on a student visa, because I think people always take that as such a burden, and they don't go out for something that they really want to do because they don't find ways around it. So it's really inspiring to hear that you went
by that
through.
time I wasn't on a student visa, so by that time I was a temporary or a permanent resident. I think I was a permanent resident by that time, or just in between. So I wasn't on a student, but it did start on a student visa. Yes.
But yeah, that's so cool, because we were just speaking about this before we started, recording as well, that I love from your story, and why I really loved that you came to this podcast is because a lot of the people think that when they come to Australia, they can't have an outstanding career and you make it sort of. They always think that they can only do like secondhand jobs or like very low.
Correct. And I do find I obviously met a lot of people who sort of who were stuck in those kind of positions, and a lot of times I find that it was because they never actually put the effort in to learn the language. I'm generalizing here, but a lot of times I think if we make that sacrifice and we put that extra effort in, then those doors can open for us. It's a very unfair expectation from us to come to a different country and expect that the country caters for us. We need to also hopefully keep our traditions. I think it's really important, but learn the language. If we can't communicate, we cannot possibly expect to build a career. And depending where you come from, of course, I'm generalizing again, but but sort of our part of the world, I think we come with the advantage of a very high work ethic, which certainly pays off here.
Yeah, yes, it does. So looking back at your journey, what would be your recommendations or learnings that you would share with someone who is now coming to Australia?
In terms of to try to build a career?
Yes.
In terms of, yes. The number one would be to learn the language and learn it as well as you possibly can. Mix with people from different backgrounds as well, as much as it's really, really comforting to be around our own sort of nationalities. I think it's really important to go out of our comfort zone. And you already are out of your comfort zone because you came to a different country. So really embrace that and try to find situations when you can do that. Australia is also a really good place to actually build your network, to go into networking events in terms, whatever the direction. Like, for example, for me in real estate, it was great to attend seminars or attend business breakfast that's around real estate, that's around property, or perhaps it's around small businesses in the area. And are you going to necessarily directly benefit from that? Maybe not. Maybe you don't get a business deal out of that, but you're definitely building your network. You are practicing your pitch about whatever your profession is going to be. So, whether it's podcasting, and then you can actually have a platform where you meet people and you can explain what you do and why you are doing that. So I guess that's probably the key takeaway. Learn the language as well as you possibly can and network and embrace your uniqueness. That is something we talk about a lot. Sometimes it's a bit of a cliche, but apart from obviously doing the right things and working hard, the best way to stand out is be yourself and be unique as you are rather than trying to be someone else.
That's good advice. Thank you. Do you want to dive into real estate?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. What would you say, from your opinion, what are right now the biggest challenges that visa holders face when they're trying to rent in Australia?
The biggest one is probably the demand compared to the supply. Of course, there are different markets, and I'm not familiar with every single state. I mainly have experience with New South Wales and ACT, but even within those areas, we've got pockets where there is such high demand that visa holders probably feel that they may not get the same opportunity, or local people may be prioritized before them. That would be one, the demand, but that affects Australians just as much as visa holders. And the other one probably would be that they're not prepared, they're not aware of the expectations. So I'm not sure about Estonia, but in Hungary, the way how we rent properties or manage properties is completely different. So unless you become familiar with the expectations, it's not possible that you can prepare in a way where you can compete. So those two would be the two key challenges in my opinion. The first one, not much you can do about that unless you are willing to move into another area. But the second one is something that we can definitely empower visa holders to be more aware, more prepared, and help them understand what to expect when it comes to renting a property.
What would you say are like the biggest mistakes that people make in their rental applications?
The biggest one, and again, this is not just for visa holders, but especially for them, is incomplete applications. You can imagine and appreciate when a property manager has a very busy open house and perhaps they get up to 15 applications after an open house. They will prioritize the ones that are already there and completed rather than constantly go and chase people for documents that they haven't supplied. So that is, even throughout my years in real estate, would be the biggest one. And that's something they can definitely change. And that sort of ties back to the same challenge I mentioned, that they may not be as prepared. they may not realize that when there is such competition, the application should be ready and ready to go and submit it, because it probably won't be on the market in 2 weeks' time. Whereas where they are from, there is a chance that they will be actually followed up and asked if they want to submit an application. So that would be the biggest one. And what sort of documents to provide would be another big one. Understanding that they do need to prove affordability, how they will afford the property. And sometimes they are a little bit scared about the lack of rental history. So there are a couple of ways when it comes to references. Even if they don't have a local rental reference, they can supply documents and information to be still successful.
Yeah, because I've had like a lot of the really young people that come here like straight after high school, and they wrote to me, they were like, there's no way I can get anything because they have no job. You know, they've lived just out of their parents' house from back home, and they come here and they realize like, oh my God, I can't get anything.
Yes, that is quite common. The biggest thing there is probably not the lack of rental history, but the lack of evidence of affordability, and that will be very difficult. So again, that's probably might be different in every region and maybe even with every country people come from. But in 2008, I remember when I came, there were a couple of ways to actually going into sharing rather than straight out renting a property on my own. So this is something that obviously I need to have a disclaimer to be incredibly safe about, especially in today's age. But in 2008, I joined a Facebook group which was Hungarians in Australia or something alike, and posted an ad that I'm looking for a room, and I joined a Hungarian person there. The benefits of that is that obviously you have somewhere to arrive to, but also you can actually go on the list with an existing person. So that is a really good stepping stone for visa holders to then be able to go out and rent on their own. So if they become a co-tenant and they are on the lease, then they actually start to gain a rental reference, and they will have a rental ledger, and they will have a much easier time to then move on from that perhaps temporary accommodation, and then go on their own and rent something when they have a job, when they have a couple of pay slips and show that they can actually afford the property as well. So that's one good way, but again, safety first. So I really, really want to make sure your listeners do their research and they only go into these situations where it's completely safe. The other ways I know that a lot of Hungarians on visas started out is boarding houses operated either directly or indirectly by people who help them organize visas. So all those organizations who organize certain visas and help them with the visa application process, they also have these registered boarding houses where they are up to, sometimes 8 rooms, and people can just start there and rent a room, and then hopefully once they establish themselves, then they can go out on their own. So these are sort of stepping stones, and it may not suit everyone. If someone wants their own space, maybe it's a family and not a single person who is coming, and it's understandable they would like to have their own apartment. Just be very, very mindful and understand that the expectations when, even if you don't have rental reference, definitely you will have to demonstrate some form of proof of affordability.
Yeah, because when I went to viewings, it's, right now it's pretty crazy. It's like a small festival when you go. And I always felt so bad for the real estate people because they had to manage like 100 or even 200 people in Perth coming in to look at one apartment.
Yes.
It's unreal. And it started like a bidding war on site.
Yes.
And I saw that she was struggling so much. She was like, no, we can't take bids, because everyone was like, I'll pay you 400 on top of whatever, who else, because they didn't have nowhere to stay.
That is exactly why most states, I'm not sure if all, but most states actually made rental bidding illegal. for the exact same reason. And we have regions, as I was talking to some of our offices, where there has been such an increase in visa applications because regional towns are usually recommended for certain skilled visa types to sort of move people away from the capital cities. And because of that, there is such high demand, and they sort of become a bit more knowledgeable how to deal with the visa applications, I guess. But yeah, it really depends on the area, and the demand, as you say, it's exceptional, and that is one of the biggest challenges. And as I said, it's a challenge for local people as well, just as much as visa holders. The other thing, when it comes to applications, I should also mention that they should be able to demonstrate that they are on a valid legal visa and how long they are allowed to stay in the country, because that can make it harder for a landlord or a property manager to navigate an application when they don't know how long the person is actually legally allowed to stay in Australia.
What do you have any other tips that you want to give out to visa holders who struggle with rental properties? Maybe like in terms of wordings. I always, because people, especially from Europe, like you said, when you come, you're used to that. You have like no other a competition in securing a rental. So I'm always like, just write like Romans, like how much you can write, just do everything. So I always had like the biggest like letters to like the real estate people. I was like just trying, like you said, like trying to make them, like right now I'm on this visa, but then I'm like planning on moving to other visas, like to get them like more like to paint a picture of like what I'm expecting.
Yes, it is a good idea, but do keep it brief. So if anyone would like to have, usually applications have like an About Us section, or if they want to write a cover letter, it is something I highly recommend. Again, safety first, so don't really put details in that you don't feel comfortable with. I think it's a really important thing, but also keep it brief, because when you say that they've got 100 people at their open houses, who knows how many applications they get, they won't be able to read 10 pages. So that's really important. And of course, not every property manager will either. You just need to be patient and resilient until someone is obviously happy to read it. But things to include, even if you come from a different country, if you have your own property there, feel free to have a couple of pictures included. If you did even house sitting, a lot of people start with house sitting in Australia before they actually rent something. You can have a written reference from the person you looked after their home as well. So absolutely you can include that, and to sort of have just a general understanding that you take pride of your home as well. And in terms of visa, if it's a concern, you can definitely explain that you are awaiting a different type of visa, or you are moving on to another one, so you are expected to stay in the country for whatever number of years that is. That definitely can help. But the biggest one that they do need to, for insurance purposes and everything else, they need to check is the affordability. So that is a big one. If someone doesn't come here with a guaranteed income, then obviously they will need to somehow demonstrate that they can afford the property. I do not suggest that you do bank statements and things like that, but I did provide, when I first rented after my co-tenancy, I did provide a bank statement that basically didn't show all the transactions. It was just a single letter provided by my Hungarian bank that showed that how much money I have in that account. With the scammers, I just really want to be mindful that people only provide what they feel comfortable with. And especially, with online submitting documents. But it's also not a requirement to provide something like that. But we just have to be mindful that landlords and agents do need to do their due diligence to make sure that whoever they put in the property can actually afford. So it's nothing against someone on a visa, but if they can't demonstrate that they either have income or they have funds to pay for the rent, then they basically void their insurance policy as well. So that would be very risky for them. So that would be a huge tip. But I do agree and encourage those cover letters. And when I had my business and I was a property manager, I did read it. And it can be very, very beneficial. And especially if you've got some, ties to the local area, maybe you're part of the community or there is your local church or your children are enrolled in that school. And those things they can definitely put in the cover letter as well.
I've never even thought about adding the community tie things, because it's such a great idea. Because like you said, you have the Hungarians in Australia, we have like Estonians in Australia, and there's like all these different community events, and people are like trying to organize different events. So that's a really good idea.
It's important, and even it's important, interestingly, for landlords as well, whether it's through an agency or privately. It's just interesting, if someone knows that someone wants to enroll the children in there or in a particular school. Sometimes they sort of think that's great, and they want to support that community. So it is something that I think it's great to highlight.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little about buying property in Australia? Because now me and my partner, after almost being here for 6 years, we start to look at, buying property. And we've sort of discovered that, when you're on so-called like a temporary visa, it's so expensive to actually buy a property, and all the financial advisors have advised us to wait until we get our PR at least. Do you have to elaborate more on what are the expectations and what we need to have when we're still on a temporary visa and we want to buy something versus on a PR?
I don't deal with buying and selling as much as I do with renting. I can definitely share my own experience and just sort of generally what I see in the market. There are a lot of restrictions around foreigners buying in Australia, and it goes down to the nuances, whether the property is established, whether it's a new property, a newly built property. There are differences. There are restrictions around wanting to buy something that you use as an investment and rent out, compared to when you actually want to make the property your primary residence. So there are a lot of nuances. Probably the biggest advice I would give is based on when we purchased our own property, was that we used a very, very experienced broker. And the reason why I bring this up is that she basically, at that time, my partner was Australian. I was still on temporary visa. And going to a bank meant that we couldn't buy anything. And we didn't understand why. And she later explained to us that most banks looked at myself, even though I had a full-time salary at that point, they looked people on temporary visas as dependents. So whatever my Australian partner earned, I didn't count as an extra income. I counted as a dependent. So he couldn't even qualify for a mortgage because he had a dependent. So if you already have two people on temporary visas, it's almost like they don't consider that as an income, or they didn't at that time. And what the broker suggested, and I'm not sure if this changed, so we bought our first property in 2010, if I remember correctly. And at that time, there was only one out of the 4 big banks that actually considered applications from temporary visa holders. So I would definitely look into speaking to a broker, maybe perhaps someone who is very much aware of foreign investment and people on visas, different visas, to purchase a property, and they should be able to guide people who want to buy, because not all banks look at applications, or back then they didn't look at them all the same. I believe when you want to buy an established property, so if you wanted to go and purchase this property, you could only do so if you are approved for that, if you use it as your primary residence. And there are even restrictions around if you buy it as a visa holder, as a primary residence, if you move out, maybe because you get a different job in I don't know, in Victoria, and you think, well, we can keep it and rent it out. I believe that there are regulations that if it's no longer your primary residence, you need to sell it within 3 months after you move out. So there are a lot of nuances around that. The best advice would probably be, in terms of buying, to speak to a really good broker, someone who understands the banks and the requirements and the financial institutes, and understands, where they would be looked at as an income, and where a temporary resident would be looked at as a dependent.
Yeah, because I think even the interest rates for loans and everything, it almost like doubles. And
for a foreign buyer, yes. So
yeah.
I guess the government tried to introduce that when they're, as a way to try to make affordability a bit more reasonable for Australians, because we do know and we do hear that it's a hot topic, isn't it? And that's why that it's a ripple effect on the rental market as well, that we just don't have enough property for the number of people perhaps we have. And I believe that there is an easier process when you are looking at newly built properties as well. Not sure, obviously in that area where someone is looking, whether there are new developments and properties that are sort of a land and home packages, but that could possibly be, I'm not an expert on that, but that would be possibly something to explore also, alongside speaking to a very knowledgeable broker as well.
Do you feel like that property, market where we're standing right now, is it in, the line of changing, or do you feel like we're going in the same lane for a while?
Since I've been here, I arrived in 2008, and ever since, every single year, people tell me that the bubble is going to burst. The bubble is getting bigger and bigger, and even though in some regions in Australia the market adjusts here and there, it seems to come back. And again, I'm generalizing, it's a huge country with so many different markets, but generally speaking, I don't really see the trends changing. Again, I'm not an expert, I'm not an economist, but if I just look at the long-term trends, even if something changes for a year or two, it still seems to be going up. And that's why the rental market is the way as it is, because it's becoming harder and harder even for Australians to enter the ownership, property ownership. It's probably not what you wanted to hear in terms of an answer.
Do you know, I don't know if maybe you can't say the same from your point of view where you're working, but I've always, when I get like bad rep for, all the visa holders that you get in, working in the mines and so on, I always tell Australians, I'm like, but use the opportunity, like just rip out all the money that you can from backpackers, because they will pay it. Because really, like, I have, some friends who pay like crazy amounts of money for, a 4-bedroom house. And I'm always like, be smart about it. Like, don't just complain about it, but use that opportunity to really build up your wealth. Because
absolutely. And I think it goes both ways. Sometimes people like to complain about immigrants and visa holders, but they spend a lot of money here. They I can't remember currently, but But I know that even just the visa applications, it's a huge revenue boost for the country. I'm not even sure what they cost now, but it keeps going up every single year. For someone to even be able to have a permanent residency, we are talking about tens of thousands of dollars by the time you finish, and all the money they spend here. And there are industries that completely rely on immigrants. So, giving them that bad rep is really not warranted because they contribute to the country greatly.
Yeah.
I should say we contribute to the country.
We contribute.
I'm sort of I'm an immigrant too, and I always still hear the jokes that I probably came on the boat.
I don't know why, but I always hate it when people who've been here so long still say that they're not like really intent on staying here.
Yeah,
because I'm always like,
that's my dream. I want to stay here, and then some other people don't. Is that what you mean?
No, I'm always like, because I'm always the same. I'm always like, well, but you spend so much money to stay here, but then like even when we talk about having kids, we're still like, oh, but Australian schools, and
that is a big one.
So
that is a big one.
So then we're always like, but you build your career in one place, your network, your everything, and then what, go away?
I know it's hard, isn't it? But at the same time, I just feel like, and it's not, everyone is different, but I just feel like if you've done it once, you do it again anywhere else. And a lot of times people don't start their business or don't become successful until their 40s, sometimes 50s.
And maybe second time you'll do it quicker because
And it depends on the people. It depends on the couple. I think it depends on what you want. I don't know. I think sometimes, as much as I'm a planner, I think sometimes it's important to just go with the flow as well. Because you just don't know the opportunities that can come up. You just don't know. But saying that, would I just make a rash decision and say, oh, well, let's sell everything and go? No. Like, it needs to be intention around that. And it needs to be, what do we want to get out of it? And why are we doing that? Is it just a long holiday, or is it actually another change that we want? So I think there is a lot of pace in letting things be. Like, you don't need to very, like, your next is your next 3 to 5 years. You want to establish yourself even more. You want to have your permanent residency, maybe even your citizenship, and then you start thinking about that maybe 5 years or 10 years after, maybe something changes again. Who knows? I think that's the benefit of we don't have to make a decision now. What's going to happen when we are 55?
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
And so many things change, and you will change, and your relationship will evolve, and what you both want to do will change. So I think I love being here. I'm forever grateful that I made the decision to come here. Wouldn't change it. But that doesn't mean I have to spend the rest of my life here. But you know what? Maybe I will.
You never know.
You just never know.
I love that as a backpacker too. Like, sometimes my mum on a call would ask me like, oh, what are you doing in 3 months? And I was like, Mum, I don't even know where I'm going to be in 3 weeks.
And sometimes it's nice, and other times it's really nice to actually make plans and have firm plans, and then sometimes they change as well. Then what?
Yeah.
Then what? There is nothing wrong with changing your mind. And that's another thing you probably will learn in your 30s, and a lot of people tell me this and agree that this is something that happens later in life, that you no longer feel that just because you made a decision, whether it's in your 20s or even earlier, that you need to think the same way for the rest of your life. A lot of times people think that, my way is so set about whatever topic it is, and then I can't become a different person just because once I made that decision that I think that way. It's not like that.
Yeah.
We evolve.
Yeah.
It would be awful if it wouldn't change.
Yeah. Yes. I truly feel that Australia has given that to me as well. You know, coming from back home and moving here, even though I was young, I was still sort of, you know, I love my friends back home and everyone, but I then got the freedom to redo my whole identity because you didn't have those people being like you said, like, oh, but you don't do that.
Yes, totally. That's a different kind of freedom, isn't it? I agree.
Yeah, and you can do that in every state.
Yeah.
If you move states, you can go all over again.
You can. And then there are times when maybe you want to feel a bit more settled, you know, and that's okay too. I think we don't need to look at life as it always has to be like this. You know, sometimes it goes in waves. Sometimes you want more change, sometimes you want more certainty, and you just go with it as long as you feel good and you feel content. And it's aligning with where you want to get to long term. Obviously, like if you want purposely to build a career, you need to focus on that. You need to put all your energy and intention into that. But apart from that, the rest works itself out.
Well, that's good to hear. Let's talk a little about more property management and tenant rights. What tenant rights would you bring out that you think that tenants normally might not be aware of?
I think generally speaking, tenants are very well educated, but this is probably a topic where visa holders wouldn't have that knowledge. So that's something that's more specific to them. And one big one would be privacy, access, like requiring to give access for certain things. Things like if they want to sell the house, for example, while they are renting, you know, in what ways can be a lease terminated by the tenants or by the owner. Those probably are the biggest ones. And also rights around repairs and maintenance and keeping the property to in a good standard would be probably the main ones that they may not know the specifics, or they don't feel that they have many rights because they are living in someone else's property. So definitely privacy, access, and the right to have the property in good condition would be the main ones. And it would depend in every state, like the legislation does depend, but if I just think back the years when I had various people from different countries in properties that I was managing, they were sort of surprised when they would get a notice in advance rather than just a phone call the day before that someone is going to come to the property to do an inspection, whether it's a routine inspection for their tenancy or whether the property owner would want to sell the house and they would want to do an open house. So they weren't really sure that they actually have a say in that, and there is a process based on the legislation in the given state or territory that how many days they actually need to give a notice to.
Yeah, because we've had that same thing. They just call up a few hours before.
Did I? There you go.
And what should tenants do if they face unfair treatment or disputes with the landlords?
The easiest thing, in my opinion, is to talk to their landlord or property manager, because a lot of things come from misunderstandings. So that could be a simple question, or it can be something firmer referring to the legislation. So first of all, especially if they've got a good understanding of the language, then they do have the right, and they should have their lease agreement. And the lease agreement should actually spell out their rights and responsibilities equally. And I do recommend that rather than just signing and being happy that they get the keys and moving somewhere, they actually should read the release, and not just for their rights, but also for their responsibilities. They can also access freely the state-relevant legislation as well, which they can. It probably is a bit drier. They may not want to go to that detail. And most states also have tenancy advocacy services as well that they can contact freely and ask for advice as well. I do recommend that they at least attempt to have a discussion with their landlord or property manager, because that's always best for the relationship. And most of the times, a majority of the times, it should really be just something very simple that they can then sort of discuss. If not, then obviously they do have the avenues to take it further with the relevant parties and tribunals in their states.
Because I think it's because we've always had, property managements, but a lot of people take their rentals through marketplace, and then straight with the landlord. And I've had so many incidents where my friends have the landlords just showing up and sitting in their apartment while they're renting the house.
You are so right, yes, and that's one of the reasons we really want to educate landlords, in terms of even just from Ray White as well, to make sure that landlords understand their responsibilities as well. And most people do, but of course there are always the ones that can benefit from the further education and understanding that, it is like at least a part-time job for them if they want to manage the property, if they want to keep up with the legislative changes and all those sort of things. In those cases, I would still recommend to reach out to their landlord. As I said, sometimes the good old communication is the best way to resolve an issue. If not, or if they don't have a positive outcome, or the landlord is unwilling to have that discussion, then they definitely can contact the advocacy services and ask for further advice as well. But
is that for free? Or?
Yes, it is free. It is a free service, yes. I haven't checked if there is one in WA. I would be surprised if there wasn't, but it would be depending on the state as well.
So from your time when you started and you actually dealt more with maybe tenants, do you have any unique or unusual property stories that you sort of always remember that stood out?
I definitely do remember a lot of different clients, and probably nothing outrageous or funny. I think it's just how people live very differently, and as I always say, I think be proud of where you came from. I had a lot of tenants who would put an absolute feast on the table for me to arrive, and some who would be giving me gifts because they are so incredibly generous. Like certain cultures, you couldn't go into their house without accepting a coffee or a tea or something to eat. So it's probably more heartwarming stories rather than very weird and unique ones. Obviously, some people use bathrooms differently, and they install things that are sometimes, are unusual in a property, and use the property somewhat differently than what I'm used to. But it's probably mostly the hospitality that I would say that stayed with me. I had some wonderful tenants from various parts of the country. I guess I have had probably more unique stories with landlords, that they are not visa holders, but they are from different countries. And it's interesting that sometimes their approach to property stayed with them from how it was in another country as well. So again, I go back to communication and communication. Sometimes you just need to clear those expectations. I once took over a management with tenants from a different country. They were on a skilled visa, and I had to bring a lot of things to their attention. In fact, to be honest, when I walked through the doors, I took that over from another agency, and I had a previous report showing really glowing reviews how well the property is kept. And when I walked in, it was in such state where I thought I was actually set up, and there is a camera to show how surprised I was, how the place was presented. And again, I go back to the same thing. You need to speak those things out. They actually had no idea. They had their own cleaners and housekeepers in their own home. They actually didn't have any concept of the basics, what we consider the basics in terms of looking after a property, because someone else did it for them in the country they came from. And I actually had to spend quite some time with them to go through every single detail, that you actually have to clean this, you need to open that, and all those sort of things. But they were so willing. They just needed the information. But that will actually stay with me forever, because I honestly thought it was a setup, especially looking at the previous report showing how well the property is kept, and you walk into something so different. That was definitely something that stayed with me.
Must be a bit awkward too for you to really keep your professionalism and...
It could be very awkward, but if you always go into these situations with the mindset that maybe they don't know, then you actually come from a place where you can actually help them. And hopefully, I never had a problem with them after that, but I did have to spend a lot of time going through the property and explaining how things are being used and cleaned, and then following it up with a letter, because they simply didn't know. It's not that they were bad people, and it's not that they did it intentionally. It was just something they were unaware. And I think a lot of problems in life and in property management could be solved. And that's why I encourage any of your listeners, if they feel that there are issues, first talk about it, because majority of the times that's all it's needed. And when something else is needed, then you can look into other options, such as the tenancy advocacy services and things like that.
Well, I do find that the routine, every 3-month inspections, because we have some real estate back home, so I always look at it from like 2 perspectives, because I haven't seen it anywhere else, and I'm always like, well, it's such a good thing for owners to have thousands of pictures every 3 months to have taken off your property, and every single thing that is happening in there. Whereas where we come from, you can there's nothing like this. There's no accountability for tenants whatsoever.
Exactly.
So in Australia, it's for the tenants it might be like a bit harder at some points to work around it. I think we waited over 8 months just to get approval to get a dog into the house, whereas in Europe it's like, I don't,
Yes.
I almost don't have to say.
And same thing in Hungary. They can paint the property, they can make changes they want to. It's almost like they really live there like it's their own. There are no entry condition reports. There are no proper end of lease inspections. So obviously it is so much more detailed in Australia.
Has it always been like this in here?
It has been for a very long time since I've been here. Absolutely. It's been maybe not as detailed in terms of like the inspections perhaps, but since I've been in real estate, it absolutely has been. There were obviously different things. Back then we were getting rent payments cash and having to walk to the bank and getting checks, and inspection reports weren't online. They were carbon copies and having sort of give the paper-based inspection reports, but there were still inspection reports. It's really, I think it's important to look at those inspections, that it actually benefits the tenants as well. Even though it's inconvenient, hopefully they can talk to their landlord and property manager to arrange a time that suits both, but it really can help them. I actually have had so many experiences where if I don't go there and look at things with a different eye, they don't notice it, whether it's a roof leak or something, and they would say, oh yeah, we haven't noticed that. And it's also a really good way to actually get to know each other and have, if they are at home, and just sort of build that relationship. Everything is about relationships, so it's a good opportunity to do so. And just to keep up the cleaning as well, at least
it's
sometimes
good.
that's the reason why the oven needs to be cleaned, and they do clean the shower differently. They keep on top of the garden maintenance, so it's sort of like a nice check for the tenants as well.
I thought it's mandatory to leave the house. I didn't know that you're allowed to be at home.
Look,
we always leave.
it could be depending on the state. I'm not familiar with the legislation here, but in New South Wales and ACT, it's absolutely optional. Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who maybe wants to pursue a career in real estate in Australia?
Just start it. Really, it's probably one of those industries where you can get in with quite minimal studying, which is scary, and I would love to see that change. But at the moment, it's still relatively simple to get into real estate. Be prepared that you will have to start from the bottom, but you will see the benefits of that. I started as a receptionist, and that is the best place to start if you want to have an amazing overview of the office and the dynamics. And from then on, then obviously you can definitely go into either the property management or the sales side. Again, no one will be a successful sales agent from day one. They will have to start as an associate and hopefully get into an environment where you can learn from other people, but other people can mentor you. And definitely choose the right environment and office that has good values and good standards and the people that you enjoy working with. But just get started, be prepared to work from the bottom, get to know the industry, get to know the ins and outs, and it's a very rewarding career. If you like working with people, if you feel comfortable going into different properties, whether it's selling or renting, it is definitely a fun career.
That's so cool that you started from a receptionist and you like slowly worked your way
And I'm
up.
so glad I did. I really am glad I did it. It was such a great way to get to know the business and build that confidence, because I learned something every time rather than being thrown into the very deep end. It was just such a nice gradual way to step up and up, and sometimes people think property management is limiting, but it's actually an amazing career path, and there are so many ways it can go. Same thing with sales as well. I know some people then move into buyer's agent roles as well. Some people go into interior designs, and there is so much around property, not to mention strata, insurance, home loans, and other things as well.
What's coming for you this year? Do you have any goals, plans?
This is my second full year. This will be my second full year in this role, and my passion and mission in 2024, I really focused on how property managers feel, how supported they are, and focused a lot on their mindset as well, and making sure that especially within the Ray White brand, that the customer service is exceptional. That is something that we always strive for. And in 2025, we would like to see the education to continue. And I definitely have a couple of upcoming programs and sessions for that. I'm very lucky to be able to work with numerous offices, very engaged property managers. So my plan is for this year to continue that and grow it bigger. We have had a fantastic event just the other day, our kickstart for the year, where a large number of property managers came together and learned about things that are not just property. One of the keynote topics we had for the day was emotional resilience, and just as much you may not, or your listeners may not feel that property managers can be stressed just as much as they can get stressed when they are looking. They absolutely can, because most of them are trying to cater for so many different people under some high expectations when it comes to workload, and most of them genuinely want to help people. And help them obviously with their accommodation, and therefore they can be under a lot of stress. So really focusing on how they can be even better, not just at their job, but in general, and when they are dealing with people, and again, as I said, customer service, that will continue to be my key focus for the year as well.
And the final question that I like to ask in this podcast is, if you could share just one message with the world, what would that be?
Without sounding like it's a cliche, isn't it? Because that's usually the thing. One message, the first thing that comes to my mind, and it will be the biggest cliche, is that life is amazing. Enjoy it. Life is, try to live in a way where you thrive rather than just exist. This is something we sort of spoke a little bit about before the mics were on. This probably is my other passion, to see people thrive. There is so much beauty. Yes, there are difficulties and challenges in life and things we may not like or love, but seriously, the beauty is just as much, if not more, and we need to focus on that. We need to focus on feeling good, being good to others, and to ourselves as well. So that probably would be my message, and if I could have one wish, that probably would be my wish.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast today as well.
Thank you very much.
I really do hope that this gave, some help for people. I definitely got a few keynotes, and I like you as a person so much. You're so nice. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.